Hello and welcome to this lecture on disability and sport for your AMCPP module. So we're going to be covering sport in detail for being a physio in sport, and also we've got to think about being a physio in disability sport. So disability sport is massively up and coming. The Paralympics is hugely popular, and in many ways, it's more interesting than watching able-bodied sport because there's a lot more complexity to it. And we'll be covering some of the things that you need to know if you're a physio working in disability sport. So what do we need to know? We need a basic introduction to disability and sport. So rather than just encouraging people with disabilities to do exercise, we want to encourage them to do sport, and they can do that at a very high level. So we've got to recognise excellence in disability sport, and by that I mean people who are gifted and who might be able to compete on an international level. We've got to identify the different types of impairment, and we're going to gain a little bit of insight into disability classification, where you as a physio can use your assessment skills to help classify different disability athletes into the correct category so that they can compete on an equal stance, and then identify and implement either sport or exercises to the disability community, and also gain a little bit of insight into amputee athletes, which is a growing market. So normally what would happen is we'd cover disability sport in the first hour and do some group working. Then in the second hour, we'd do disability and sport in the community, and then we'd do the athlete journey. We will do these practically face-to-face when we see each other. So what we need to do is just really prepare for those particular episodes. There's some videos to watch and some work that we will set you in the session. So what is disability sport? This is a video that's well worth watching. Obviously you won't be able to click into the screencast, but there's a copy of these slides in one of the AMCPP folders. Just click on this quick 5-minute clip and it gives you a really good introduction about what disability and sport and exercise are, and what they're not, and how they can benefit people, particularly our patients who might have all sorts of things where they need help. So for example, this is the classification, which is an international classification of health conditions if somebody has a disease or a disorder. So they will have some type of impairment. It might be a physical impairment, it might be a cognitive impairment, whatever it is, but it will affect some body structure, and that will then limit the activities that they can participate in. Limit their activities and restrict their participation in society, in sport, which is not good and is a form of prejudice. So we need to address that. There will be environmental factors to that, i.e. getting to and from maybe a venue, and then personal factors as well, like a flare-up of symptoms, for example. We're going to base our impairments and classify them into 3 different categories. One is physical impairment. Here there is a functional limitation due to something physical happening. For example, your patient is an amputee. Then there might be a sensory impairment, normally to do with the visual system or the hearing system. And then there is also an intellectual disability where the patient has a cognitive issue and has learning disability. Okay, so 3 separate classifications there. We can further divide the physical impairments as physios into 8 separate areas. So we've got impaired muscle strength and power, we've got decreased range of movement, we've either got limb deficiency or complete limb loss, we've got leg length discrepancy that is significant, Someone might be short in stature, such as dwarfism. They might have high tone or hypertonia, which is that increased muscle tension. And they might have ataxia, which is problems with coordination and balance. And they might have things like cerebral palsy. So just some examples of physical impairment there. So disability groups, spinal cord injury are generally grouped together because they will have similar pathologies due to the level of lesion of the spinal cord. Visual impairments are grouped together. Cerebral palsy is grouped together. Amputees are grouped together. And learning disability is grouped together. And learning disability is obviously a hot potato. That was only reintroduced 10 years ago. And then we've got les autres, okay, basically the others, which is anything that doesn't fit into those categories. So when we're doing classification for the Paralympics, and we'll be learning this skill, and all it is your basic physio assessment, and then that will respond to a criteria about whether that disabled athlete can participate at that particular level. So when you're a classifier, you've got to answer a couple of things. The first is this disabled athlete eligible for the sport? Do they have an eligible impairment for that sport and that category? For example, in order to participate in the cerebral palsy category, you must have cerebral palsy. That has to be diagnosed, recognized, and you have to provide evidence for that. And then, does the athlete's eligible impairment meet the minimum disability requirement for the sport? So what happens is we've got to have, someone has to be disabled enough to fit a particular category. And it can be very upsetting for the patient when you tell them they're not disabled enough in order to participate in that particular sport, when clearly they have a disability. This is a very frustrating fact for the patient. It also can be very challenging for you as the assessor. So we've got to make sure that they meet that minimum criteria, otherwise they cannot participate in that particular category. So athletes will be really, really sensitive to the categories that they're in, because if they're in the top of the category, they might win easily. If they're in the bottom of the category, they might stand no chance of winning. It's about getting it right. And then, which sport class correctly describes the athlete's limitation most accurately? So athletes can be constantly swapping categories due to classification and potential re-diagnosis. So just something to bear in mind there. So the history of the Paralympic movement goes all the way back to the 1960s in Rome, when 400 athletes and 23 countries participated. And then the history of the Paralympics has really just continued and continued. Obviously in 2020, Tokyo was unable to happen. So Rio is our last example in 2016. So that was over 11,000 athletes from 207 countries. So if we look at the difference, 400 athletes, now over 11,000 athletes. Coming from 207 countries. So the participation in this sport is growing and growing, and this has a very proud history. Particularly in London 2012, when there was, only just under 5,000 athletes. So it's definitely growing, and it's definitely something that you, once you qualify, can get involved with. There is a shortage of Paralympic classifiers. So that's something that you already have the skill set for, where you can assess against the criteria. But ultimately, what we want to do is we want to help disabled people become athletes if they're capable and achieve what we once thought was impossible. So you have some slides to work through and some questions to answer, and then I look forward to seeing you in the practical sessions when we can go through this in more detail. Thanks for watching.